let's look at using the grouping method to factor expressions in the form x squared minus bx plus c. So we want to factor x squared minus 11x plus 28. So we have a is equal to 1, b is equal to negative 11, and c is equal to 28. And in order to use the grouping method, we'll need to split this minus 11x into two terms. So we can set up a sum and product puzzle to help us figure out what these two terms should be. We know that their coefficients will add to negative 11 and multiply to positive 28. Since they have to add to a negative number and multiply to a positive number, we know that that means that both our factors are negative. So let's find our factor pairs for 28. We could have negative 1 and negative 28, negative 2 and negative 14, negative 4 and negative 7. Now that we have our factor pairs, we want to add them together to see which combination adds to negative 11. Negative 1 plus negative 28 is equal to negative 29. That's not it. Negative 2 plus negative 14 is equal to negative 16. Also not the pair we need. Negative 4 plus negative 7 is equal to negative 11, which is what we were looking for. So the two numbers that solve our puzzle are negative 4 and negative 7, and these are the coefficients that we'll need in order to use the grouping method. So we have x squared plus negative 4x plus negative 7x, because negative 4x plus negative 7x gives us that negative 11x that we just split up, and then plus 28. Now that we have four terms, we can use the grouping method. So we have the group x squared minus 4x plus negative 7x plus 28. And we can factor the greatest common factor out of each group. So for our first group, we'll factor out x. So we have x times x minus 4. And for our second group, we can factor out 7. So we have 7 times x, negative x, plus 4. But we don't like having a negative x, so we'll factor out a negative 1 as well. So we have x times that x minus 4, which has a positive x, so we're okay, plus, let's factor out a negative x divided by negative 1 leaves us with positive x, and then that plus 4 divided by negative 1 gives us minus 4. So we factored out a negative as well. And now we'll factor out the common factor from each group. So both of these expressions have that entire x minus 4. So we have x minus 4 times what's left when we factor that out. So from our first group, we're left with an x, and for our second group, we're left with that minus 7. So the factored form of our expression is the quantity x minus 7 times the quantity x minus 4. And we can see that minus 7 and minus 4 were also the numbers that solved our sum and product puzzle. Now let's factor the expression x squared minus 17x plus 72. So we have a is equal to 1, b is equal to negative 17, and c, our constant, is equal to 72. In order to use the grouping method, we'll have to split this b term, this negative 17x, into two separate terms. We know that the coefficients will need to add to negative 17 and multiply to 72. So, got my negative. So, we'll start by finding the factor pairs that multiply to 72. Since they'll need to multiply to something positive but add to something negative, that means that both factors will be negative. So we could have negative 1 and negative 72, negative 2 and negative 36, negative 3 and negative 24, negative 4 and negative 18, negative 6 and negative 12, or negative 8 and negative 9. So these are the factor pairs for 72 that are negative. Now we need to add them together to figure out which pair adds to negative 17. Negative 1 plus negative 72 is equal to negative 73. That's not it. Negative 2 plus negative 36 is equal to negative 38. Also not quite what we need. Negative 3 plus negative 24 is equal to negative 27. Or at least getting closer. Negative 4 plus negative 18 is equal to negative 22. Negative 6 plus negative 12 is equal to negative 18. And finally, negative 8 plus negative 9 is equal to the negative 17 that we're looking for. So the numbers that solve our sum and product puzzle are negative 8 and negative 9, since negative 8 times negative 9 is equal to positive 72, and negative 8 plus negative 9 is equal to negative 17. So these are the coefficients that we'll use to split up the minus 17x. So we have x squared plus negative 8x plus negative 9x plus 72. And now that we have four groups, we can now use our grouping method. So we have the group that's our x squared minus 8x, another group that has our minus 9x plus 72. And we can factor the greatest common factor from each group. So for our first group, we factor out an x, and we're left with x minus 8. For our second group, our greatest common factor is 9, and we're left with a negative x plus 8. But we don't like having a negative x, so we're going to factor out a negative 1 from that second group. So we'll leave our first group alone, so we have x times x minus 8, plus, now we'll factor out the negative. So we have negative 9 times negative x divided by negative 1 gives us positive x that we need, and then that plus 8 divided by negative 1 leaves us with a minus 8. And now we can see that each group has a common factor of x minus 8, which we can then factor out. Factoring out that x minus 8, we're left with an x in our first group and a minus 9 in our second group. So our final answer for the factored form is the quantity x minus 9 times the quantity x minus 8. And what you'll notice is this minus 9 and minus 8 are the numbers that were the solution to our sum and product puzzle.